And welcome in, Dog Nation. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith here at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. We got the chance to be here last year, but the biggest difference between now and then is that Georgia's going to have 3 guys that go over the first round.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to believe, and it isn't. I mean, we've seen other Georgia drafts that have been pretty talent-rich, but I mean, Georgia just continues to pump them out, and you got 14 guys. This ties a Georgia record. There's 14 Georgia players here at the Combine, Kaylee, and I could have made the case for 17. You know, Dan Jackson, the tight end Ben Urasic could have been here. Chaz Chambliss. I mean, this is a really talented class. Now, maybe not quite as top-heavy as we've seen in the past, but as you said, 3 guys in the first round, I don't know many other teams are going to be able to do that.
Well, that's the precedent now, even though we look at this year as a down year for the Dogs, the talent that they continue to produce and the level of development that these guys have to go through when they're at Georgia, it's very evident. And so they have the second most people of any team here, only behind Ohio State. And I actually thought that out of everyone we spoke to today, Warren Brinson was the one that put it into perspective perfectly. This is Warren Brinson on how you get developed at Georgia.
How did Georgia prepare me, man? Georgia prepared me just by just the physicality aspect of going through something so hard. Like I came in with probably 14 guys at Georgia, and I think only 5 of us made it through. So that's the biggest thing. It's hard at Georgia. If you can last at Georgia, you can last anywhere. They build a culture of winning. They build a culture of men, and I mean it's really hard. And if you can make it through that, you can make it through anything. It's not a lot of stuff that can break me just because I made it through Georgia. I had a coach like Kirby Smart who always confronted and demanded excellence from everybody, and that's what you need in the NFL, somebody who doesn't get mad at hard coaching and having a hard culture around them. But Georgia prepared me for everything.
Mike, I mean, that might be the quote of the day. If you can play at Georgia, you can play it anywhere. And I think that resembles why they continue to have so many guys invited year in and year out, because the scouts and the NFL teams know what they're getting out of a Georgia player.
Well, when you got so much NFL talent on both sides of the ball, we think about the games in the SEC getting you ready. Just the practices, right? You go through the practices, you're lining up across from a future NFL player, potentially a first rounder. I mean, you're going to be bumping and hitting first round guys every time you turn around, whether it's in the weight room or whether it's on the field, your conditioning. And these are elite players that have a different level of work ethic. And that work ethic is what's led them here. And so that's why when Georgia comes to the Combine, the guys are prepared for the workouts, the ones that choose to work out. We'll have some news on that here in a bit. But they understand what it takes to compete at the highest level. And, you heard Howie Roseman say that the other day, the Philadelphia GM, when he talked about drafting the Philly Dogs and understanding how Kirby Smart's going to prepare these players. So a little extra draft stock for a Georgia guy. And if it comes between 2 guys and it's pretty close, you're going to take the Georgia guy.
So we got the chance to hear from 5 different Georgia players today: Mykel Williams, Jaylen Walker, Smile Munden, Ty Ingram Dawkins, as well as Warren Brinson. Is your Stackhouse is here, just to get the chance to hear from him. And Mykel, I don't know if I just haven't been paying that much attention, but you want to talk about someone that has so much charisma, but you've also seen him scattered in different mock drafts. Some have him going as high as 9 or 10, and then some getting into the lower teens, but he really impressed me today.
Well, when you talk about Mykel Williams, you're talking about a guy who has a very high ceiling, and maybe we didn't get to see it as consistently as we would have liked, but remember, he had a lot of injuries and actually played through those injuries. I think he told us today he was at about 70% or a little bit less, and he's still out there, wreaking havoc. But there's something to be said about playing injured, because the fact of the matter is football's a violent game, and when you go to the NFL, you're not going to be 100% every week. So Mykel kind of showed the scouts that, hey, this is a guy that's going to be there to answer the bell. He's going to play through the bumps and bruises. We saw Jalen Carter do that a few years ago. As for the draft stock, it depends on the team and if they're willing to draft him on his ceiling or draft him as he is right now. Mykel has room to improve. He'll tell you that. But at the end of the day, he's 6'5", 265. He can run you down. He can hand fight. It's really hard for offensive tackles to get their hands on him and really, block him up. He's really good against the run game. You mentioned the charisma. I think he's a good locker room guy. I know he's a good leader. And today he was glib. If you didn't get the chance to watch the YouTube video that's on DawgNation's YouTube page, or if you didn't get a chance to read my story on DawgNation.com, you got a little bit different version of Mykel. Because when they're at Georgia, it's very much about the team, and it's very much about not giving any bulletin board material. When you come here to Indianapolis, you're promoting yourself. You're telling everybody how great you are and how many different things you could do. I mean, I learned that last year. I mean, even Ladd McConkey had a little bit of swag. So did Brock Bowers. I'm going, wait a minute, that's not the. But the agents tell him, hey, don't be shy. Make sure you let those NFL teams know you're confident in your ability to produce, because they're out there listening. And I think all these guys are going to do really well in their interviews.
So apart from hearing that Mykel Williams played at only 60% all season long, which you and I would have never been able to know that, but if you're an NFL GM and you hear that and you're watching his tape from this year, you're thinking to yourself, what kind of player is he like at 100%? Now, he did tell us today that he would not be participating in the drills. He would wait to showcase those skills at Pro Day. But for someone like Mykel, who knows, he still might not be at 100%, it's probably more beneficial for his game. And the most important part of him being here is going to be that medical evaluation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You know, he had that ankle that slowed him early, hurt it against Clemson, didn't really practice until the Texas game. You're not going to tell Steve Sarkisian he wasn't 100%. Sark was like, yeah, this guy looked a lot different in person than he did on some of the games he'd watched on tape, because that was the first week that he practiced since he injured the ankle in the opening game. Jaylen Walker, another guy who says probably not going to work out here. And it's a little bit of a chess game when you know you have high draft stock. You don't really want to give him anything to be critical of. I will say this, talking with Jim Nagy, the executive director of Senior Bowl, former NFL scout, he'll tell you Georgia Pro Day turf slower than the combine. So I don't think they're doing themselves any favors by running at Georgia, but they are giving themselves more time to get in better condition. In Mykel's case, he said it took a few weeks off after the season to rest that ankle a little bit more, so he's a little bit behind on training on some of the guys he'd be competing with. Whereas I think Jaylen's a guy that I don't know that he's going to be the workout warrior. I think the film and the versatility in the interviews, so you come with your strengths here. I don't think the 40 is going to matter as much for him. Now, as we get later into the week, and we're going to have a chance to talk about this, I mean, the main event, y'all need to be ready for this, is going to be Arian Smith in that 40-yard dash. Not today. We'll get into Arian later in the week. But to me, that's going to be the big Georgia thing, is going to be Arian Smith. And if he runs a low 4.2, could Arian Smith work his way into the second day of the draft? Second or third round pick? Again, we'll dial it back to the guys today. I don't want to get too far ahead, but I'm excited about this, because everybody's talking about this guy from Georgia that's going to run a 4.2.
And so just for some clarification for players like Mykel Williams and Jaylen Walker, we don't know if they're going to participate in maybe one event or no events. Very vague with those responses, but we know that the majority of stuff that they will show will be on Georgia's Pro Day, which will be March 12th. Of course, we'll have coverage of that.
And Kaylee, the other thing, so folks need to know, we talk about 14 Georgia players here. You know, this is like a 5-day event. So the reason we talked to those players today was it was a lot of defensive linemen and linebackers.
D-line and linebackers.
Right. Tomorrow, the only Georgia guy that's going to be doing the interviews is Malaki Starks. So you got the DBs tomorrow. And then the next day will be the skill guys, which would mean Trevor Etienne, Dominic Lovett, and Arian Smith. And then on Saturday, the interviews will be the offensive linemen. So they kind of spread this out. So tomorrow, the defensive linemen and linebackers are going to be out there at Lucas Oil Stadium, you know, running through the drill work. You'll see that televised on the NFL Network. You know, meanwhile, the DBs will be doing the interview. So it's a 5-day event, just to explain why there's some Georgia guys available today, and then later in the week it's a little bit different, very involved. I mean, anybody who's anybody in the NFL is here. I mean, it takes over the whole town. And this Indiana Convention Center that we're standing in is literally one city block long. It is one of the largest buildings I think I've ever stood in.
So let's go back to Jaylen Walker for one moment, because it's not like he was somebody that we got to talk to at the Senior Bowl. And I think you put it in perspective earlier that this is the first time we really get to hear these players brag on themselves. And for players like Jaylen Walker, who are so deserving of that, first of all, you just want to talk about the way he commands a room. And he couldn't even get a single word in because everybody's trying to ask him questions, but his presence and how calm he is, I can't imagine how well he does behind doors in those interviews. But Jaylen Walker was one of the ones to really brag on himself and say, hey, the good thing about me is I could be at a different position every week. It's hard to prepare for a defender like me because you don't know if I'm going to be on the outside. You don't know if I'm going to be on the inside. It's that versatility that Georgia taught me that makes me so dynamic and that separates me from everyone else in this group.
And versatile, because, you know, a lot of different NFL teams have, like, different needs. Like, what do we want to get in the first round? Do we want an edge? Do we want an outside backer? Do we want an inside backer? And you take a look at Jaylen Walker and you go, you know what? We could put him there. And he has the versatility to do those things like he did at Georgia and move him around in that hybrid role, as he likes to call it. And, you know, his father's a coach, and he really understands the coach speak. I mean, I think he's very articulate, obviously. He was very philosophical today with his time is the enemy statement. This is a guy who has a real sense of urgency and understands that he needs to make the most of the moment. So while he may not be working out for the teams tomorrow, he's not going to be skipping leg days or ordering pizza and popcorn. I mean, this is a guy who's in training, who's going to be elite. It's going to be his absolute best when the time does come to work out for these teams.
Someone else who I got to hear brag on themselves today, and it did put it in perspective for me, was somebody like Warren Brinson, who did come back an extra year to advance his skill set more. And when he was meeting with the teams, he told us, I showed them the best parts of my film. There's parts of my film that aren't great, but when I'm at my best, I'm one of the best defensive linemen in this whole room, especially for a guy of my size. And so he told us that he was, drawing up plays and showing film to the teams that were watching him. And I thought that was a good point, that when you go back and watch the best of him, he's as competitive with everybody else. He's just got to have more consistency.
Yeah, right. Consistency is the word. Nazir Stackhouse as well. Now, it's tough when we're trying to compare guys to Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt, first-round picks. They're obviously not that, but they're still very good. They're still better than 95% of the defensive lines in the country. It's just at Georgia the standards got so high. So I understand why there may be a little air of disappointment, and yet when you look at Warren or when you look at Nazir Stackhouse or when you look at Ty Ingram Dawkins, you say, man, look at that frame. Know the program that they've been in. This is a guy, and Kirby's used the analogy before about bamboo, right? It all grows at different rates. So if you're an NFL team, you might look at Warren Brinson, Stackhouse, and say, you know what? Maybe they didn't blossom at Georgia quite as much as a Carter or a Davis, but they went through that program. They went through their entire career, and these are guys that Kirby Smart obviously endorses if he's putting them on the field and making them leaders. So while their draft stock right now may seem a little bit lower, don't be surprised if by the time the draft rolls around, if these guys inch up a little bit, a round or two, with that Georgia pedigree.
Well, that's that common theme that we've been hearing today of, hey, if you don't know what to do, just draft a Georgia guy, because at least that they're going to be ready. And I think that applies to someone like Ty Ingram Dawkins, who had his first career start at Kentucky, had his career high snap count, and also led the team in sacks that night. Someone who maybe could have benefited from another year, but hey, right place, right time, a little bit on the younger side, but somebody with so much potential who understands the culture of winning. I think that he's one of those guys that, hey, with the right numbers, with the right interviews, that he could creep up the closer we get to the draft.
Well, I mean, the fact that he was invited to the Senior Bowl, and Stackhouse and Brinson went to the East-West Shrine, which is just a shade below. There's still some NFL folks there, but Ingram Dawkins was the guy that a lot of NFL teams wanted to see. And of course, the other great thing about Kirby Smart and Georgia is that these guys play special teams. And when I was doing some work on the Philly Dogs and writing stories and looking up their snap count on PFF, all these guys play special teams. And you got to have guys that are willing and want to play special teams. So that's another feather in the cap for a lot of these Georgia players, is that, look, they're not only going to contribute on the field on offense or defense, but, a guy like Kelee Ringo doesn't start for the Eagles. He's like the fifth or maybe the fifth cornerback or fourth cornerback. But you look, and Keely's on virtually every special team unit for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he made some really big plays on special teams. So those units count in the NFL. Those things are considered when a player is being evaluated. His willingness, does he have the skill set? I mean, it's not just running around trying to tackle somebody on special teams. There are skills. There are ways to do it. Dom Lovett, a guy that'll go Friday, he's a gunner. He's a guy that's really good on the outside. So these are extra things that Georgia has, not just the competitive nature of everyday's practice, not just the pedigree of playing for a guy like Kirby Smart or playing in the SEC or being a championship environment, but also having football skills. Remember, Kirby also makes these guys play two different positions. Right now, Jaylen Walker is a true hybrid that plays like 3 or 4, but every player has to know 2 positions on his defense. So there's a lot of built-in value that Kirby understands and helps these guys prepare for the NFL. Yes, they want to win championships. Yes, they want to get a great education at Georgia, but they understand that by playing for a guy like Kirby Smart that understands what the NFL is looking for, with so many players that have come before them and had great success, they're increasing their value. So maybe the NIL offer is not going to be quite as much as Georgia. This takes us all the way back to the Kirby factor that Centel likes to talk about on his Wednesday night show. But there is the Kirby factor. So maybe Georgia's not quite there with some of these schools for the elite prospects in the NIL. But at the end of the day, their NFL value is going to be greater coming out of Georgia than most any other place in college football.
So the way things work here, they're a little bit chaotic. Sometimes you have 8 guys going at once or 9 guys going at once, and you're just trying to listen to a little bit of everything. And there were two things that I found interesting today. First one was I heard two different people that were not Georgia players say that out of everybody that they competed against in their college football career, Tate Ratledge was the best player that they had played against, including I don't know the name of him. I just heard it in passing. He was from Texas. He said that Tate Ratledge guy, every down, every snap was hard. And so when you've got guys who they don't have any reason to just throw names out there. I mean, they're serious about this, and so that's just even more of an example of how Georgia has made its way into the winning culture and how difficult it really is to play against them.
Well, and it used to be the Alabama guys, right? You used to hear them talking about the Alabama guys all the time. Now you're hearing them talk about Georgia. You look at the win totals, over the last 4 or 5 years, I think Georgia has like 5 or 6 more wins than Alabama. So, and that's a tribute to the players and a tribute to Kirby and his staff. But yeah, that's where Georgia's at. And one of the questions I asked today, Kaylee, and it's going to be a theme, is it harder to win an SEC championship than a national championship?
Yep.
And I know it sounds crazy on the front end, but then Ty Ingram Dawkins told us that at the Senior Bowl. And I was asking Mykel Williams about it today. Yeah, was it Mykel or was it Jaylen? It was either Mykel or Jaylen. And
both said it.
Yeah, they both said it, but I think Mykel made the point that, hey, we played TCU and they were a great team, but it was a lot tougher beating LSU in the SEC championship game. So you know what? You're right. It sure was. So, that's where the point's well taken. I mean, and, just look at this year's playoff, for example. I mean, okay, Penn State made it one step further and got to play Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, but they didn't play in their conference championship game. Who did they end up playing? SMU and Boise State. Do we think Georgia could have handled that draw? So I understand what the players are saying, whereas to win an SEC championship, you got to get through the entire season, which is very physical. You got to be one of the top 2 teams, and then you got to play a top 5 team across from you. In the college football playoffs, not necessarily the case when you look at some of the teams that got in because of their conference automatic bids, or maybe some of the at-large picks from other conferences that had a better record that maybe didn't play the same kind of schedule.
All right, let's do a little something different here because in comparison to last year, there was a very clear number 1 pick. And 9 times out of 10, that's usually who it is. Somebody needs a quarterback, and there's one that stands out from the rest. But, I mean, different draft boards have different guys going number 1. If you had to put your Mike's money on it today, who's going to be the number 1 pick?
Well, I'm going to try to interpret that question 2 different ways. Who do I think will be number 1, or who would I make my number 1?
You can give me both.
Okay, I would pick Travis Hunter. I think he's a freak. I did a story on him for AJC and understand where he's been and what he's been through, the elite skills that he has. That's a guy you build a defense around typically. You say these NFL offenses and defenses are somewhat homogenous. Everybody does it the same way. But when I see Travis Hunter, I have images of Deion Sanders. I have images of Champ Bailey. I have images of guys that have been able to go both ways and make plays, just at the drop of a hat. I remember talking to the Colorado defensive coordinator, and he said, 1 minute we're over there on the chalkboard, and we're going through some things defensively, and Travis says, hey, hold up, coach, I'll be right back. And the next thing the coach knows, he hears the roar of the crowd. He looks up at the Jumbotron, and Travis Hunter's treaded out there on offense, and he's caught a touchdown pass, and he goes 65 yards, comes running back towards the sideline and said, all right, now what were you telling me? I mean, this is a dynamic game changer. Now, these quarterbacks,
that's tough.
Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, I understand these are very talented players, but I'm not seeing Peyton Manning here. I'm not seeing an automatic guy that you go, yep, we're going to plug him right in and he's going to start and he's going to be ready to take off right away. And I don't mean to undersell those young men, but I think it's a very complex game. I think it can take time. I'm not sure about the competition level that Sanders saw at Colorado. He hasn't done a lot of workouts either. That bothers me a little bit. Maybe he knows his stock better than I do, but he doesn't really want to go toe-to-toe with anybody throwing, and that would maybe raise a red flag for me. The Miami quarterback, I think he's fantastic. I think he's wonderful.
Is he the first one off the board?
I would think so. I think he's probably the safest pick. And then the other guy, the guy that's rising up, and you know this, one of your favorite players ever, Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. Well, I mean, you did have an interest in trying to interview him at the Senior Bowl.
I mean, because I wanted to hear what he had to say about playing Georgia, obviously.
Obviously, that's what it was. And the light blue uniforms.
Scrappy player. Scrappy player.
Yeah, you like those scrappy guys.
Yeah.
I like Jackson Dart. I think Jackson Dart is an NFL quarterback. So he intrigues me as potential first half of the first round guy. Wasn't viewed as that right out of the gate, but you turn the film on, you watch this guy make plays. Yeah, threw a couple interceptions. That confidence can be dialed down a little bit. That can be solved in the film room. One guy that's not here that we thought would be the number 1 overall pick. Wait a minute, somebody's got a Lamborghini driving down. No, wait, Carson Beck. It's amazing. To me, it's amazing how things can change. At the beginning of the year,
So
we
quickly.
all thought that Carson Beck would be the number 1 overall pick. Where would he have gone if he came out? Well, the injury kind of took care of that. I think Carson Beck would have gone still in the first round had he not injured the elbow. I really believe that.
It's still like you said, not to take away, but this is a weak quarterback class all around.
It is.
And which means that there's room for improvement from the guys that aren't Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. You can really work your way up because it's like you've got 2 guys that, okay, they're probably going to go to the top 2, but everybody else is just kind of there in the middle. And so you have more opportunity for yourself to only increase your draft stock if you're one of these quarterbacks like a
Quinn
Jackson
Ewers.
Dark, Quinn Ewers, Riley Leonard.
Riley Leonard, yeah, some of these guys. It is an interesting draft. I will say this, and talking to a lot of the NFL folks here, and this I just shake my head. Trevor Etienne, what were you thinking? Because there's like 40 running backs. I'm not sure that Trevor Etienne can work himself into the first 3 rounds.
I
Now,
think the
this guy-
Senior Bowl helped him with that, though.
I think it helped him, but at the end of the day, he's a 205-pound guy that didn't show a lot of durability, and he's fast. And don't get me wrong, I'll be rooting for Trevor Etienne because without Trevor Etienne, Georgia's not winning an SEC championship. He helped you, carried you down the stretch against Kentucky. What do you have, 5 touchdowns in 2 games against Texas? I think he's the only one that scored a
He
touchdown.
single-handedly
against
beat
that.
Texas.
I mean, he was dynamic, but I looked, and not necessarily because Trevor Etienne needed to prove more, but because what Kaylee was talking about. This is a very deep draft for running backs. So, the same Trevor Etienne next year could have been a second-round pick because there's not the depth of running backs. So there's a lot that goes into these players' decisions. The other flip side for Trevor Etienne is running back is a position that typically don't have long careers. He'd be giving up 1 more year. That's where I call on the collective and say, hey, what would he have made as a 3rd-round pick? Is it $1 million? Can somebody come up with that for Trevor Etienne for next year? So now that's another factor with some of these players. We were asking about Christian Miller today. He could have been here today. We could have been interviewing him. That's a guy that would have gone in the first 2 or 3 rounds for sure. But he's coming back to the Dogs, taking some of that NIL money, and he's going to cash in. He's going to raise his stock even higher. So it's interesting to see all the complexities of the NFL Combine. Who's here, who's not, why they're here, why they're not here. But the standard, the thing that continues to be the same since we started coming to this Combine at DawgNation, I think, 7, 8 years ago, is that Georgia guys hold so much respect in everyone's eyes. And whether we're talking to them or talking to players from other teams, you're going to hear Kirby Smart's name. You're going to hear about a Georgia Bulldog. You're going to hear NFL coaches talk about that standard. And so far, that standard has not dropped off 1 iota.
And you're going to hear every single person deflect the question about the Kirby hot mic moment. They know that they've had it, but nobody wants to talk about it.
They used to. Maybe Kirby's told them that.
Crack down
guys,
on it.
don't tell those
the only
stories
thing
anymore.
they'll say is that he's got eyes in the back of his head and he can see from 100 yards. But every time you ask, they're like, "Yep, I had it. Nope, don't want to talk about it."
No, they don't. They don't want to get into too much of the deep. Maybe they feel like the NFL teams might question him. But it is funny to hear the guys talk about how Kirby keeps them on their toes. And admittedly, the first couple practices I went on, I thought to myself, "Gosh, is this guy ever happy? Is this guy ever happy with anything?" But the reality of it is he keeps that sense of urgency in the players' heads that I can't stop, I can't let up, I have to keep going, and it's been effective. And the guys have fun with it because when Kirby cuts on them, it can be kind of brutal and it can kind of hurt the guys' feel, but everybody else kind of laughs, and then everybody realizes, all right, sooner or later, we're all going to get it. So have a little bit of fun with it. I think Kirby keeps them on edge a little bit. I love the story, not to get off too much of a tangent,
fine.
but I love the story of when the recruits came to practice. And if you haven't heard this, it's golden. I know Kaylee knows where this is going. There were recruits that came to a practice, and Kirby called them out for being on their cell phones. He said, if you're here and you're on your cell phone and you're not paying attention, you're not the kind of player that I want. I mean, wow, there's a message. If you're going to be at Georgia practice, you better be engaged, because that's what it's all about. It isn't about fun and games, because you want to make it to this level right here in Indianapolis, be one of the 14 players invited at the Combine, and know how to work, have that sense of urgency. And Jaylen Walker with a quote of the day, time is the enemy, Kaylee.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, that tough love and discipline is what gets you here, and it's the reason that you and I are even having these conversations about these players, because of the way that Kirby taught them. Now, again, it's only the first day. The guys that we got to talk to today, defensive linemen, linebackers, they will work out tomorrow starting at 3. The lone wolf of tomorrow for the Georgia guys is going to be Malaki Starks. I mean, poor guy. Everybody's going to be all over him because he's at that main stage, podium number 8. They're taking all the stars. So I'm excited to see how Malaki goes about it, just because we knew from day one that Malaki was a first rounder. There was no doubts about it.
Well, he's dynamic. He's a great interview. His charisma is something else. I won't mention the name, but I was talking to one NFL person one time, and he said, I'm just not sure about Malaki Starks. I think he might be a little overrated. I said, well, have you talked to him yet? He said, no, not yet. He ended up talking to him that day. He goes, man, that's a great kid. He may go a lot higher than I thought. Now, I don't know what that says for Malaki, but when you talk with him, he is so engaging and charismatic and dialed in. He is going to put on a show in the interviews, and I think he'll do fine on the field. This is a pretty athletic guy, so this is a Malaki Starks type of event. He was built for the combine, so don't be surprised if you don't hear Malaki Starks' name on ESPN Sports Center, when you go on Twitter. Just knowing Malaki, he knows how to put on a show. He does it at Georgia press conferences. Now we're at the combine, where the stage is a little higher, the lights are a little brighter, and if you know Malaki like we do, he's like a moth to a flame. So get ready for Malaki Starks tomorrow. He is definitely going to put on a show, Kaylee.
And, of course, we're sitting at lunch today. I see that ticker on the bottom of the mock draft, and it's got Malaki Starks going to the Eagles. So that would be the cherry on top of it all. But if you want to see the full clips from all of our interviews that we did today, you can do that by checking out our DawgNation YouTube page, and make sure to go look at our Combine playlist so you can see all the stuff that we do this week. We'll have more coverage on Malaki Starks tomorrow, and then, of course, the skill guys that'll go on Friday. So DawgNation, thank you for joining us. It's myself and Mike Griffith. We'll be here the rest of the week here at the NFL Scouting Combine.